Good morning. I'm Gemma Mendoza, Head for Research and Content Strategy here at Rappler. If you're a Filipino and you have internet access, you're probably on Facebook. This past week has been particularly rough for everyone's favorite social media platform, with threats of congressional investigations from both sides of the Atlantic and investor lawsuits hanging. How serious is the Cambridge Analytica data privacy scandal for Facebook? With us today to discuss this issue are UP professors, both of them UP professors, Professor Clarissa David of the UP College of Mass Communications, and UP professor, also UP professor, from the College of Law, Attorney J.J. Dicini, who is also known as an expert in information technology law. So we start with the first question. What do you see is the extent of the fallout of this scandal for Facebook? You want to start?
I think the fallout is going to be big. It's already big. So they already lost a lot of value. Mark Zuckerberg personally has lost a lot of value. The company has lost a lot of value. And the regulators are coming, right? Because what it means for us and for Facebook is that they are holding a lot of our data, and it is not clear what they're doing with it. It is not clear that they are delivering on their promises of keeping our data safe. So the thing that is currently being discussed also is the fact that this was not a breach. This was not a data breach. This is their business model. This is what they do. So if you have outfits like Cambridge Analytica, who, as I understand it, sort of secondhand got the data. Facebook had willingly given the data to an academic who gathered it through an online quiz. Then what makes it even more nefarious is it's sort of second-level data. So it picks up, if you do the quiz, it picks up your data and picks up the data of all of your friends.
Yes.
So you may have consented to having your data,
but not your friends.
But your friends never consented. So, and you have no power to consent on behalf of all your friends.
So it's a serious
breach of trust. That's what it is. It's a serious breach of trust. So it will damage the relationship between users and Facebook. It has damaged the relationship between investors and Facebook, because it is Facebook, the company's responsibility to make sure that it says it does what it says in terms of safeguarding and securing data, and it's a promise to their investors that they do that. So that's a breach
as
of
well
trust
as their users.
Yes, and now the issue is the regulators are going to take notice and say, does this need to be regulated? Because right now they're not being regulated, and that's going to be a big conversation, not just in the US but all over the world, because now they're also being called by, I think, the UK or the EU.
Yes, for Brexit. Yes. JJ, what do you think?
So, on the one hand, we can see this is a major PR concern for Facebook. On the other, it's not entirely clear to me whether or not there's been any violation of the Facebook terms and policies, and whether or not the consent, even to the extent of whether consent is necessary from the other 50 million whose data was scraped. Because I'm sure if we were to look into the Facebook policies, at some point we did give consent for them to pass on this data to third parties for certain purposes. So I'm sure sort of in the law or in the contract at least, so that Facebook, the standard terms and conditions and their privacy policies, there's nothing here that was violated. And this is why they refuse to call this a data breach, because this is actually a lawful use from their standpoint of our data. That this is the bargain that we struck, knowingly or unknowingly. We agreed to have our data used, right, for purposes of having that data used by marketers, to presumably to benefit us. Now, I think Cambridge Analytica took it a step further to use it to manipulate us, to perform actions that affect our exercise of our democratic rights. Certainly, no one could have anticipated that somebody would do that to that extent. But we do know that all this data is helpful not only for shaping views from a cultural standpoint, and this is where Steve Bannon comes in, right? Where this is changing views in culture, which changes views in politics.
And advertising
and yes, so culture, products, but also in a sense, political views can be changed by people's changing attitudes in the way they view the world.
And it's sort of, sorry, it's a sort of a natural evolution of how you would use data, because
Yes.
that's how they use data for advertising. It's exactly the way they use data to figure out what kind of milk they're going to sell you, because
Correct.
they know that you're buying diapers, and they know that you have a 2-year-old child, and they know that, so they know when to show you the ad. So the technology, the algorithm, the data mining, the data scraping, it's all been around. It's all been used to sell us things. The only difference now is being used for a different purpose. It's being used to sell us them political ideas and stories and
Yes.
fake information. So it was bound to happen. I think it was a question of who was
When?
going to do it well and
Correct.
first.
Yes.
Because it's a professional. Cambridge Analytica is a large professional firm. They're not underground sort of hackers
And
dealing
they've
with
been
data.
around. I mean,
They've been
in fact, this
around
is
and
not the
open.
first time this was discussed,
Yes,
diba?
yes.
I mean,
Absolutely. So the name Cambridge Analytica first came out sometime earlier, middle of last year.
yeah.
It wasn't clear then what the line of responsibility was between Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. So when it was just Cambridge Analytica in the news, it didn't seem like a big thing. But now that they've connected it to Facebook, now people are asking, wait a minute, is my data
Correct.
an issue? So I have a
Yeah.
follow-up question to you. I can understand the argument that
This is legal.
this is legal and that I consented for them to take my data. But is it legal? Not legal, but I guess the debate is whether do I have the power to consent on behalf of my friends for a
harvest their
third party app to harvest their data from my feed?
Okay, so the answer to that question, I think, if I were Facebook's counsel, is to
Yeah.
say that your friends already consented. You're not consenting on their behalf. They already consented that their data will be transferred through a series of ways that, now, you may not have known that you have what you consented to. And then Facebook has this whole dashboard on how you can protect yourself from your
Yes.
data being used.
Yes.
So if we were to step back, if we, depending on what the fallout will be, if this will end Facebook's business model, I think what is on trial here precisely, are what accountability measures should be in place when it comes to people or companies whose business model it is to take our personal information
Yes.
and make money from it in exchange for a free access to their service. And I think if any good will come out of this, that will be it. Now, globally, we're seeing two major strains of data privacy protection regimes. Now, one is the US/APEC, and the other one is the EU Data Protection Directive, now the GDPR they call it. So in Europe, it's a permission regime. You can't use my data without my consent. You have to ask my permission. You have to ask it a certain way. You have to tell me exactly how you're going to use it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can't use it. So in the EU, this is definitely a violation of EU law.
So
Because
they can be pursued under EU law.
I think they will be
Yes.
definitely be pursued under EU law. The only question is whether or not there will be damages and fines that will be imposed, because the GDPR is a new statute in the EU. It will only take effect in May of this year. But these are acts that happened before. And so they will have to reckon with the accountability measures
yeah.
of the old law.
So in the old law, there's no...
The laws were in each country. There is a directive, there is a parang minimum guideline for all EU countries, but each country has their own law. So the UK has their own law, the Germans have their own law, the Italians have their own law. And because of the laws were slightly different, they now have one general regulation that will come into effect to harmonize everything across Europe. But this will take effect only in May. Now, in the US, the accountability scheme is it's not a permission regime. It's a market-based regime. In other words, so long as the entity has no evil motive, right? Has no evil motive, then it can use your data even without your consent.
But
and this
how
is
can
why
you read into the minds
is
and
evil
hearts
motive?
of
well, I think this goes into why Google's tagline is do no evil, because the whole point is that that's their business model. Their business model is to use your personal information in ways that hopefully will delight you and hopefully will not cross the line where it gets creepy, diba? So it's a balancing act, right? So in Europe, because it's permission based, they have a very fixed idea of what privacy is. In the US, they don't. That's why I say it's a market-based regime, because the providers of services, right, who need your data, might change your idea of what privacy means. And we see this for very young people, right? So a lot of young people I know that when I have a meal with them, they take a picture of what they're eating before they eat it. So that's something that older people cannot.
They check into the restaurant.
Correct, they check into the restaurant. So their idea of where the line is drawn between private and public is very different from the way older people have it. And this is possible in places like the US because they don't have that permission regime. You know what they say, right? It's easier to ask for forgiveness. Better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. And this drives innovation. So in the US, that's why they're more innovative in terms of personal data or the privacy business, as it were, making money from personal information. They're more innovative in the US with things like Snapchat and Facebook. Facebook would never have happened in Europe because if you have to ask your permission,
for
then
every time something, right?
then you'll never be able to build the business model around it. But this business model now is on trial because people didn't realize what they consented to.
Yes.
And the question now is, to what extent will Facebook allow itself to be held accountable, right? And whether people will prefer, and this is really something that Facebook is always subject to, right? Market forces. People might say, I like social media, I like seeing what my friends are doing, I like keeping in touch with my friends and sort of broadcasting my fake life, my fake book life, right? On social media, but I want to do it in a situation where I don't get exploited, and other services might come forward and say, we can provide you that level of protection that
so
Facebook
it's a
doesn't.
window for that kind of service.
That's what I'm waiting for.
That means you will have to probably pay for it, because then what kind of business model will support that, right?
It's just like what media had to grapple with, right? So commercial media have to set, the business model is we sell advertising, the audience is the product. So if it's free, you're the product.
Yes.
And so that's what Facebook has been. If the New York Times did it like that online for a long time, eventually they decided we're going to charge people subscription.
Right.
Instead of relying completely on advertising for revenue. So that whether that business model is possible, there's a lot of thinking. There's a bunch of engineers there. I'm sure they can find a solution to this. But I guess there's a global jurisdictional issue here is, what happens if you have a regime like this in the EU and then a regime like that in the US
and then a regime in the Philippines?
What is it in the Philippines? What are our privacy laws? Can they tinker with it enough so that, for example, if somebody from the US wants to mine the data of the people in the EU, the people in the EU are under a different privacy regime.
Yes.
What does that mean? If Facebook would have to figure out separating all of these jurisdictions out, algorithm based.
So there's an agreement between the EU and the US called the Data Privacy Shield, which allows limited access by US companies to data of people from Europe.
Okay.
So they've negotiated this, and this is the second agreement that they've had, because the first agreement that they had, called the Safe Harbor Agreement, was struck down by the EU Supreme Court. Saying that it does not protect privacy. And actually, a lot of legal experts believe that the Data Privacy Shield, the new agreement, is likewise violative of EU law. But in order for it to be struck down, it will have to be brought up all the way to the EU Supreme Court, and that will take a long time. And so they're living with that sort of regime right now. So it's a difficult path that American companies have to deal with. But I think, bottom line is that I'm not saying that the EU regime is perfect. It also, I think the core issue here is all the regulation on data privacy presupposes that the individual is in a position, right, to give his consent for the use of their personal information.
Yes.
And I think many people do not want that responsibility.
Or do people even read?
No, they
Nobody.
Nobody.
I always ask this. I always ask this when I give lectures on data privacy.
Even I
Who
don't,
here,
I
has ever read those terms of service, and no one has raised their hand. Not even among lawyers. Not even among lawyers. So nobody reads that, unless of course the lawyer is paid to write it. Right?
Yes.
They're not going to read it. So what does that mean about consent? What does that mean about? So in other words, obviously that system is broken because. On the one hand, you could say, and maybe Facebook is the example for that, right? That these consent forms, which were supposed to protect your privacy, are now the vehicles by which your privacy is violated because you consented. Now, the fact that you didn't read it is your fault, right? So maybe that system doesn't work. Maybe we need a new system where people need to be reminded. And actually, there was a great video with, with an interview by Steve Jobs, where he was talking about, as far as we're concerned, Privacy is about telling people how we're going to use your data. We're going to tell you all the time until you're pissed off, you know, because everything we do, you need to know,
So
and you need to sign off.
Are you sure you want to share this?
And it's
or-
not just sharing, because when I consent for Facebook to take my data, I consent to Facebook to take my data and then sell it to third parties. Fine. But do I know what those third parties are going to do
Yes.
with it?
Isn't there a responsibility on the part of
Right.
Facebook to vet?
To vet the third party and say, if the
Ah.
third party then shares it to a fourth party and a fifth
Correct.
party, is that still within Facebook's responsibility?
Or
to say
measure
that we-
control. Control
Something,
measures. Put
right.
control measures where,
Put control
I mean,
measures somewhere.
Facebook could have said, okay, you have access to this data, but you don't pull it down from our servers. Play your experiments
your
within
thing inside.
our
Yes.
fenced,
Yes.
diba? Our fenced area.
Yes.
Don't download. This case, it was downloaded and then it was transferred. If they can control transfer,
Yes.
then they're not protecting us, because then it's now subject to that person's whatever regime that person or whatever
Right.
belief system that that person has in terms of, you know, how valuable this data is and whether
Right.
this something should be commodified and made money from.
Right.
And
And
we're
how do you
talking
know
here-
evil motives? I mean, I
Impossible.
could trust Facebook's
Yes.
motives as pure and good, but then the third party and the fourth party and the fifth party that's handling that same data
They
may have
trusted an
different
academic.
motives. Yes,
That's
that
what
maybe
happened
was,
here.
Was,
Right? Who apparently pitched it to
Right.
Cambridge Analytica.
Right,
And then they
right.
said this is the best way.
Right. And now that academic is saying this was never what I intended.
Oh, so,
Right.
okay,
And he's
so there-
being called a
Yes,
scapegoat.
yes, because
Yes.
he's being called a scapegoat. So you have thing is already so convoluted because you take somebody's data, share it, and then you connect data from say Google or Amazon, and then connect it to your Facebook data by some fourth party.
And somehow you complete the picture
You
of a person.
complete the picture. Have I consented to that by saying yes to Facebook? I don't. I mean, I think it's a big surprise to everybody that this is being done. It shouldn't be, but it is. That what does it mean when you complete the picture of a profile of a person from various sources of data? It's not just Facebook, but it's various sources of data.
But let me go to the, because again, you have all these platforms, right? But what are the lessons here, I guess, for users, for the ordinary users of the platforms?
Well, half seriously, I would say, if you have a friend that keeps posting those quizzes, unfriend them. Because they are
that's
consenting
right.
on your behalf to take data, for third parties to take data. So to protect yourself. But definitely, the first thing is, do the homework. I'm guilty of not doing this, but do the homework of studying very carefully all your privacy settings on Facebook. Short of deleting Facebook, which is what many people are saying we should do. If you are, I heard an interesting argument the other day about maybe Facebook should be considered a public utility because we're so dependent on it already. But if you're so dependent on it that you can't, for work, for friends, for whatever, that you can't delete it, at the very least what you should do is study. There are so many, as a reaction to the Cambridge Analytica story, there are so many tips and tricks online now about exactly how to protect your Facebook. So read one of them, follow it. I'm a big fan of deleting the app from your phone and just checking Facebook from the browser because there's an added layer of
Location data.
right that
Yeah.
gets because turn off your location data if you're not using it unless you're on Waze. Turn it off. Facebook doesn't need to know where you are in every single point of the day. So understanding how all the data in your phone and all your devices are connected, that everybody can now tap into it through your Facebook account
And listen in.
and listen in will help you figure out what you need to do to protect yourself.
What do you think, JJ?
Well, everything you said about Facebook can be said for every other app that's on your
Yes.
phone. So the thing to do
Email.
is to do this. You get a phone like this,
Yes.
right? Just unplug. They can't listen in
I
on
have
this
a phone
thing. They
like
can't.
that.
They can't
Yes.
hack.
Yes.
So you're right. I mean,
Yes.
so this is an example, right? We
Yeah.
see
Right.
what's possible for Facebook, but you've got other apps that have nothing to do with that will get your location data, and they don't need it. But they asked for it, and then you signed off on it because when you downloaded it, they said we want access to these services.
Yes.
And you know it's so complicated that you can't even keep track. I remember I was downloading a game like Angry Birds.
Yes.
Wanted to know what my location was, but I want to play the game. But the funny thing is, why do they need to know where I am?
Yes.
Right? So obviously they're scraping the
Yes,
data,
yes.
right, to get other information. So the vehicle, Facebook is a good example, but all app,
all the
makers,
apps in your phone.
yes, get some
Yes.
sort of data. There's some
Even
of them are weird.
Because they want to tell you that you have a friend 2 kilometers away who's also playing Angry Birds.
Okay, fine.
That's what they want to
Fine,
do.
fine. But then again, they don't tell you that that's the reason.
don't
They just
tell
tell you
you.
that they need
Yes.
that data.
And
Yes.
do they limit
To
the
limit what?
access?
The access of third parties
So,
to your
ito na
data.
nga, the situation is that we trust that they will protect our information, protect our privacy. At the same time, they have a profit motive, right? And therefore, their profit motive, of course, is more important to them than our privacy. We know that
Yeah.
that's skewed
Yeah.
in their favor. And so it's interesting that that there are people calling for this to be called a public utility. And obviously, what that means is they want government to step in and say, regulate
regulate
this,
it.
which is sort of unusual. And my favorite quote from this is from Dean Fabella of the School of Economics. No? And I'm paraphrasing here, and he said, I don't understand why Filipinos always call for government regulation when they don't even trust the government to count their votes.
Yes.
Right? So,
Yes.
so there's
Agree.
things that government
Yeah.
is good at, and there are things that government is not
Yes.
good at. And it's not clear to me whether or not government can really regulate this. They can try as hard as they can, but these companies are very sophisticated. They're
Or
offshore.
should we allow them? Should we allow government to regulate
No,
this?
government already does because we have the National Privacy Commission. But
Okay.
really, you have to question whether or not they have the ability to go through each and every app, right? I mean, Apple tries. I'm sure Google tries in terms of vetting which apps get on their app stores. But you know, in the final analysis, I think the most effective way to fight this is in the market. Meaning, if people really want to protect their privacy, they will choose applications, right, and companies that demonstrably, right, protect their privacy, tell them exactly what they're doing, and then they show that this is what they're doing, and they won't use your data beyond that. Because I think it's gotten beyond just violating your privacy, because when you look at what happened in Cambridge Analytica, they're fiddling around with your political
With your
rights.
elections.
Yes, with elections.
Which brings me to
fiddling
my
around with your
yung,
elections. Yeah.
that
And
question, di ba?
my issue of, I mean, regulation, I guess, is the term that everybody uses to say we should be doing something about it.
Right.
Because, and who is going to do something about it on our behalf except the state somehow? Because how are we supposed to accept responsibility and accountability from a company that is not even in the Philippines, operating where there's 66 million Filipinos on Facebook here, apparently,
Correct.
says Facebook. And they're beyond any kind of reach of
Well,
government.
our
right?
reach nga is to shut off the app.
Well,
We
yeah, but is
bankrupt
that
them.
really going to happen?
Well, so that's the thing.
Right, so
I'm saying,
which
It was
one is
floated,
more-
and then the senator who
Right.
was
Yeah.
it was attributed to was like trolled online.
Yeah.
So the challenge, I think, is for a Facebook competitor to come forward and say, look, we are like
Yes.
Facebook. We'll teach you how to download your data from Facebook so you can upload it and recreate your Facebook page on our platform. But unlike Facebook, we will protect your privacy and we will make ourselves accountable to you. So if somebody offered
Because
that,
it's local.
it could be
That's how-
local. They could be global, but they will hold themselves locally accountable. So this is what I'm saying about the market writing itself, right? Where you have another company offering a different kind of service, and I think that would be
Sure,
more
yes.
powerful. And that if anything right now, this is a sort of thing that makes Facebook even more vulnerable to its competitors.
Yes.
The funny thing is that no one has come forward, and unfortunately, and this is the world we live in, that the people who are trafficking in our personal information are huge global companies, and they're American. And the only other companies that have comparable size and financial capability are Chinese.
China.
And the reason they're able to do that is because the Great Wall of China
Yes.
excluded
Great
them
Firewall
out.
of China,
Great Firewall of
yes.
China kept them out,
Yes.
and these companies grew,
Yes.
and these companies now are one belt, one road, right? They're expanding,
Right.
especially into our area. So can you imagine
But they're also surveilling their citizens.
well, ito nga. So
Yes.
Right, so
one
it's not-
thing you could do,
So
one
I
thing
don't
that can
think that
happen.
it's better.
So I guess so now you're saying
Is it
ang tawag dyan, from the frying pan into the fire.
Exactly.
Right? So either we trust
Right,
an
so do
American
you want
company.
to be surveilled by an American company or a Chinese company? And related to that, all the news
Chinese
lately,
state.
where Chinese companies are now being banned in the US because they're surveilling. So Best Buy, this morning I read it, Best Buy severed ties with Huawei because and Huawei, because of Huawei's ability
Yes.
to just take all the data from all the Huawei phones.
And that's a commercial opportunity. That's what I'm saying. It's a commercial opportunity. Somebody out there, right, with the money and the technology and the integrity, the demonstrated integrity, can step in and take market share from Facebook. And it's about time. And maybe take market share away from Google as well. And it's about time. Google is
They have
too
to do
powerful.
it better.
Somebody will do it better.
In order for the market to move, they have to do it better.
People need to
right?
be concerned that what happened here is something that affects them in a very fundamental way, that makes them motivated enough to shift providers. Now, if that doesn't happen, so provider has to step up, and people need to know that I can't trust Facebook, or I can't trust this app, or I can't trust this platform.
Sure.
I'm going to another platform that's going to protect my privacy. Apple knows this. Apple knows this. That's why they've encrypted their data to the point that even they can't access it. But they need to do more, I think. And this is in a sense, this was inevitable. I think you mentioned that earlier.
Yes,
Inevitable that we were going to come to this. We were going to come to this crossroads because, parang the wild, wild west has to come to an end, and they need to sort of mediate between what people really want, because they just guessed what people want, and what are the possibilities of big data and what money can be made from big data. And we need to find that space. And maybe AI will be the one. I don't know. So in my mind,
creepier?
well,
AI? Not that we can stop it from coming, but AI can do all sorts of things we don't even understand what it's doing.
So my thinking is that maybe the difference between AI is that AI isn't a human being, and maybe privacy. Can a non-human being violate your privacy? Because I figure privacy is only valuable if it sort of comes to the knowledge of another human being. But on the other hand, you're right. AI might be scary in the sense that if it goes and that information is used to manipulate your view of the world, to force you to, not force you, but to make you choose something that's actually against your interests, I mean, that's terrible.
Yes.
But then on the other hand,
Because the use of AI is still by humans. It's the objective of what something is still the
ethical
human.
issues.
There are many ethical issues. Yes.
Threshed out around AI.
I think what's inevitable here is it was inevitable to have a conversation about the ethics of technology, because they never had it. They were somehow, doctors are always taught always protect the patient, do no wrong. And tech companies were innovation for the sake of innovation. There's very little questioning about what it's going to do to the world.
where's this headed?
Where if you're a doctor and you're a researcher and you're going to be cloning human beings, there's a lot of regulation and self-policing that's happening, that's keeping that from happening, because in theory, they could have done it years ago, right?
Yes.
But they decided not to. So that whole ethos doesn't exist for
So break
technology.
things first
For
before-
data
Right.
privacy, at least. I mean, I think
For data privacy, innovation in general, they sort of build it,
Okay.
deploy it, see
Yeah.
if it will fly, and if doesn't, then build
fix
another
it.
thing, right? So break it and fix it. Well, they don't fix, they break.
Yes.
Move fast and break. And, it sounded okay before, but maybe it's time to fix things.
So
right?
and on that note, actually, that's I guess that's
Yes.
where this all comes down to. Like, at some point, technology companies need to be held accountable. Maybe we need to look at, given the scale they have gotten to, look at how they can be ethically, the ethics of
Yes.
technology.
Yes.
Any last words before we say goodbye to our audience?
Why don't you take the last word?
I guess, what can you do, right? One is to, and I think we will recommend this, you mentioned this earlier, go to on Facebook, there's a dashboard, right, on things that you can do to protect your privacy. Now, should you decide to delete your Facebook page, you follow, you look for the place where you can download your data, so that you do that first. Second, you look at that part of the single sign-on, because you might have signed on to other services using your Facebook account. So you need to turn those off. You need to go to those sites and create a username password so that you can log into your account, because your account might be deleted. Once you delete your Facebook account, your single sign-on to those services might get cut off. So you need to reestablish an independent sign-on for those services before you shut down your Facebook account. So that's important. And then, I believe the best way to hold them accountable, well, if you're in a country where there's strong data privacy laws, file a complaint. Let your regulator hold them accountable.
Yes.
So I'm sure, I am 100% sure that our National Privacy Commission has already reached out to Facebook to find out whether any of those 50 million individuals include Filipino citizens, and if they are, they will hold them accountable, at least insofar as providing information. Because this is the whole issue about data breach, because data breach contains a lot of obligations on the part of Facebook that they have to be accountable for. And it seems to be the easiest way to hold them accountable, and I think our commission will take action. So do that. If you want to file a complaint in the National Privacy Commission, I would urge you to do that. They do have a complaints department, and I'm sure they will act on it, and they would be very, very happy to be at the forefront of protecting our privacy rights. And we also have to be mindful that this is not an isolated incident. Google is collecting all your data, and you have to be. This is the world that we're in now. If you're comfortable with it, that's fine. If you're not comfortable with what's happening, hold them accountable.
And buy a dumb phone. No.
I
mean, in relation to the issue of deleting your Facebook and figuring out, what struck me is this was exactly what Facebook tried to do. They told, when they found that Cambridge Analytica had the data, they told Cambridge Analytica delete the data. And they sent a document certifying that they deleted the data. And then later on, Facebook found out that the data were never deleted. So there's this issue of deleting data, right?
Yes.
So even if I delete my Facebook, my data is still out there. So it's a conversation to be had from a privacy perspective of, do I have a right as a citizen to tell these tech companies to give me back my data and then delete it from their servers and then show me somehow that it's gone? Is that possible? Of course it's possible. It's technologically possible.
But who will go after them?
Who will go after them? But at least in theory, it's important to remember that all that data, it's not just shutting them down now, but figuring out what is the line of responsibility of all the data they currently have on everybody. Because now they currently have access to everybody, essentially everybody in the country. But I think my main concern is not so much the commercial aspect of it, but the news aspect of it, the impact on people's political opinions and how it's been deployed and used to political ends. And for that, I think it's really a user issue, is that don't rely on Facebook for your news. Go to the website, read it on the website, watch your television, read the newspaper, go back offline for news. Because Facebook is such a polluted information environment. Just because it's Facebook, it's not the news source. You have to figure out where
what
to
our
get
credible
your news,
sources of information are, and rely on them.
Information.
And there you have it. We live in a world now where every action, everything you do with your phone is a data point. And at the end of the day, it's about guarding your privacy. Clearly, we cannot trust the companies to guard our privacy, so every user has to be conscious of these things. This has been Rappler Talk, and thank you very much to Clarissa and JJ for being with us today.
Thank you also.
Thank you very much.
All right.